talking about ratio. A ratio is a way to compare two numbers. For example, when one segment is twice as long as another, the ratio of the length of the longer segment to the length of the shorter segment is 2 to 1. One way you can write this is in words as 2 to 1, or you could write it as 2 semicolon 1. That means for every 2 units of length on the longer segment, there is 1 unit of length on the shorter segment. Ratios are written in several ways. Here are the 3 ways that you can write them. You could write them as 2 to 1, as words, 2 to 1, with the word 2 between the numbers, 2 semicolon 1, or 2 over 1. All of those mean the same thing when talking about ratios. A ratio is a relationship between two different things. Let's look at one. Here's a keyboard. If we were to ask what is the ratio of white keys to black keys on the keyboard, and when you talk about ratios, order does matter. So since white keys comes first in the sentence, white key number needs to come first. So if we count up the keys there, we can see that there are 14 white keys and 10 black keys. That means the ratio of white keys to black keys is 14 to 10. Or, remember, we could write it 14 semicolon 10. Or you could write it, which looks like a fraction, as 14 over 10. All of those mean the exact same thing. The next one says the ratio of black keys to all keys. That means count up how many black keys you have, which is 10, to the total number of keys on that keyboard. That would be 10 to 24. That means 10 out of the 24 keys are black. Again, writing it in 3 ways. Here's how we could write it in every way. And remember, order does matter. So if black keys are in the sentence first, they must come in your ratio first. Here's another one. Look at the square tiles. What is the ratio of white tiles to purple tiles in this pattern? Again, count up the number of tiles you have for each color. It looks as though we have 12 white tiles and 15 purple tiles. So the ratio would be 12 to 15. Again, you can write it in any way that you wanted to, as long as the 12 comes first. What is the ratio of white tiles to all the tiles in the pattern? Again, how many white tiles do we have? We have 12. How many total tiles do we have in this pattern? Is 27. So it is 12 to 27. Again, writing it in 3 different ways, all mean the same thing. Now let's look at the bead necklace. A asks, what is the ratio of spherical beads to cube-shaped beads? That means basically the circles to the squares. Again, count up how many of each you have. Well, we have 8 circles and we have 12 squares. So the ratio is 8 to 12. If you wanted to make a longer necklace with beads in the same pattern, she plans on using 20 circle beads. How many cube beads would I need? Well, in this case, you're sort of setting up what's called a proportion, and that's something we're going to learn in a little while. At this time, I will just tell you if the ratio is 8 to 12, to get it to be 30 total beads, you would need to have 20 of the circles, and we'll explain that as we go a little bit further on proportions. C asks, what is the ratio of cube-shaped beads to all the beads? Well, again, we have 12 cubes and we have a total of 20 beads. The last one, what if you wanted to make a beads with the same pattern? She used 10 beads in all. How many cube-shaped beads would you need? Well, in this case, we had a total of 20 beads and now we're cutting it in half. So we would use half as many cube-shaped beads which she would need. So she would use 6 of them. Now let's look at the list of names. What is the ratio of the names that start with J to the names that do not? Well, again, they're both boys and girls here, so we want to count them up. How many of the names belong with J? Well, if you look at the boys list, you can see that there is 1, 2, 3, and the girls list does not have any of them. So the ratio of J's names would be 3 that do to 17 that do not. That is how we write that ratio. 7 of the names begin with a J. I'm sorry, 3 begin with a J. 17 do not begin with a J. Now here are the list again. Now you can use the list to write ratios. One example would be, it's the ratio of girls' names that have only the letter A as a vowel to all the girls' names. Well, 3 of the names only have A as their vowel, and there's a total of 10 names. We could write another ratio statement. We could say, looking at the boys' list, if we wanted to look at them, names that start with a J to all the names would be 3 to 10, because 3 of the names start with a J, and there's a total of 10 names. Or you could look at the girls' names and select the girls' names that begin with an A to those that do not begin with an A. Again, you have 3 names that do begin with an A to 7 that do not. Now let's look at the pattern. First, let's count up our squares. How many red squares do we have? We have 12. How many pink squares do we have? We have 20. And how many white squares do we have? We have 16. We have a total of 48 squares in this pattern. Now let's write some ratio statements. What of that pattern could we write the ratio 1 to 4? Remember, ratios need to be simplified just like fractions. So if I wanted to make a fraction that could end up being 1 to 4, I could say it was the total of red squares to total. Because if I write that down here, I have 12 red squares out of 48 total. Well, I need it to be 1 to 3. Well, I can divide them both by 12, and that gives me 1 to 4. Again, looking at the next one, we want to do 1 to 3. Well, what can I do that will give me 1 to 3? It looks like I can take the white squares to total. That's because I have 16 white squares and 48 total squares, which if I could reduce it to 1 to 3. The last one is, what is it could be that would be 3 to 5? Again, I have to find a ratio that could be 3 to 5. Well, if I do red to pink, that would give me 3 to 5, because red is 12 and pink is 20. And I can divide them both by 4 to give me 3 to 5. So ratios are a little bit like fractions when it comes to simplifying. We must do that in order to get the statements correct. Now go ahead and give your homework a try, and we'll see you in class.